In this video, I'm going to draw this thing, a vaguely Halloween-inspired sketchy illustration. This is going to be a real-time, fully narrated hangout and sketching session, and I'm going to talk about something I think is really important, which is developing a simple, reliable process for your art. And I'll talk you through some of the steps that I go through as I create this illustration, what a simple, reliable process is, and how you can look at modifying it and developing your own. But before we do that, let's check out this, Brom. More specifically, his first art book, The Art of Brom. I wanted to make this vaguely Halloween inspired, and I think Brom is a great example of someone who mixes really good technique, really good craft, really good composition, and fantasy and horror. As usual for a Drawing Codex video, this is going to be neither fast-paced nor heavily edited. This is just you and me. We're going to hang out. It's real-time, fully narrated. We're going to sketch, look at some cool art, and talk about the importance of process. So hopefully that sounds interesting. Hopefully you'll join me. Let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Mcburnie. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, the same style that I create all my comics and illustrations in, you can check out my free quick start guide. It's aimed to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop, developing your own simple, reliable line and color process. It's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out. So here we have Brom, The Art of Brom. More specifically, again, the art of Gerald Brom, who is, in my opinion, one of the sort of best contemporary fantasy artists out there. And this is one of these books I got really, really early on, and it really sort of inspired me in so many ways. I feel like he had just such a strong point of view that was, you know, just not something that you saw a lot of at that time. And there was a really good sense of creativity and craft. I do remember looking at this book and this particular page, and this is that thing where they kind of show someone's development. And I remember kind of being like, oh, okay, like some of these drawings when he was like quite young, I was like, okay, like, you know, I've seen people sort of do stuff like that when they're sort of really old, but then it sort of got here. And I remember like literally being not much past 18. I was like older than he was at 18, and this is sort of what he was apparently able to do. Sort of, you know, early 20s, and I was just like, man, that's it. I give up. It was like so much better than me than, you know, I was at that sort of time. So I do remember this being a little bit of a sort of disillusionment situation. But yeah, I really found that just his ability to create really strong, interesting illustrations using very formal composition. So just a lot of the sort of same front on, just like character, and really sort of showing how you can create a great sense of character and story and all of the things that I think are important just by really focusing on a single character, right? Which again is something I was kind of into, was just drawing characters, and I felt like he was just able to sort of capture so much with these kind of fantasy illustrations. And obviously this really sort of harkens back to that sort of fantasy art that I was looking at when I read fantasy books when I was really young. So there's just so many reasons why Brom's art just kind of really made sense to me. And also it did have a lot of this slightly sort of post-apocalyptic, sort of very sort of unique vibe that, again, at the time I didn't see a lot of, right? And again, this was a big part of role-playing game art styles, and probably wasn't that unique, but to me when I saw it, it was really unique. Yeah, just really cool sort of mix of stuff. And I always just remember, yeah, just sort of flipping through this book a huge amount of times, just kind of looking at it, right? Again, classic Doom cover. Just such a good control of anatomy and composition. And I think one of the things that I was sort of constantly thinking about at the time was maybe not adding as much detail as this. I was a huge fan of Frank Frazetta at the time, and I remember really liking Frazetta's looseness, but then also seeing how Brom was able to add all the detail, but still maintain a lot of focus and keeping a 1-2-3 read. Just always creating what seemed like very efficient, effective kind of illustrations. Yeah, just really cool ability to, again, it's just like very sort of standard front-on characters, but that's what works so well with book covers, right? It's just kind of building these worlds, right? These things were just sort of really cool. Again, really, really simple, dynamic compositions, but just always I felt like, you know, if I did something that simple, you know, I wouldn't be able to make it quite that effective. Yeah, very classic. Just always like really, really good, simple designs that felt as if, again, the character, like it was a pose, it was this cover image, it was very good at sort of presenting the character. It wasn't complicated, very clear, but there's always just a little bit more to it, you know? Just a little bit more to all of these things, and it always just kind of leveled up that. So this is, you know, a lot of what I would do early on was just try and think about how I could draw characters like this and paint them and create a little bit of a background and thus kind of create a real world. And what we're talking about a little bit in this episode is the idea of a simple, reliable process. And I think a big part of that also is having a good system for coming up with ideas. And I think often, you know, people feel as if you kind of need to maybe do too much or more than you actually need to when it comes to just composing and creating a fun sort of evocative scene. And I think what sort of Brom really said to me early on was just how, no, like you can basically paint the same image again and again with just a character with a background, but there's so many different ways to do it. Is the character light on a dark background? Vice versa, like how interesting is the character? What pose do they have? What expression do they have? How do you work the colors, the tonality, right? Like a lot of these images compositionally seemed sort of quite similar to me, but they were all different, right? In terms of like the idea, you know, it's just a character, but every single one of these was just totally amazing, right? And the other thing, again, that I would sort of really look at is the way that there was always this little sort of sketch, right, in this book, and it sort of showed me how often a lot of these ideas were kind of planned with these very simple sketches. And so, yeah, this formed a lot of kind of what I really thought was fun in terms of coming up with illustrations. And yeah, just showed a huge amount of creativity, right? And this is something that I often recommend people do if they are trying to sort of build illustration skills, is to just kind of say, okay, let's not try and add more. Let's try and just modify what is there and see if we can make an interesting image, right? And I think that's what Brom does so well. It's modifying the background, modifying the story, the narrative, the feeling, the emotion, but not necessarily trying to do some crazy pose, not trying to sort of get clever with it, right? Just super basic stuff, right? And again, I feel like in some of the other sort of later on art books, and certainly some of the later work that he's done, and some of the stuff you can see here, when he really sort of creates a big scene, right? He can certainly make much more complicated imagery, right? So it's not to say that's sort of what the only thing that he could do, but I think that was what he really sort of said to me was, no, there's like an infinity of options when it comes to just creating a really awesome, interesting illustration with a story, with impact. Like all of these work as a cover, right? They all work to have great impact, great clarity, great 1-2-3 read. They're all finished, they're all polished, but there's also an efficiency, right? This is an actual kind of working artist. Yeah, super awesome. So here we are. Now, tools for today are a M4 iPad Pro. I have the Pencil Pro thing. I'm in Clip Studio Paint, and I'm going to be mostly using the simple mode because that kind of makes it pretty close to what you would sort of get with sort of other software that has a nice sort of simple iPad interface, but you can actually go into the more detailed one and do some more fancy stuff if you need. So again, I started with a sketch. Let me show you. If I just go to the sort of time lapse, I was playing around with a couple of different sort of things. Let's change this to full, right? Yeah, I was playing around with a couple of other sort of vaguely Halloween-inspired sketches, just trying to get this set up. I don't actually think I've used this on the iPad before. Not this one anyway. I normally use it on my Galaxy Tab or the other iPad that I've got. So I was thinking maybe I could draw a little sort of ghouly, goblin-y guy with some pumpkins. That would kind of be fun. And just sort of playing around with that. And then I was like, no, I want to just do something even more Halloween-y, right? Sort of like a witch or something like that. So I was like, okay, let's just see if I can come up with an idea. And again, you know, sometimes it's really hard to talk and do this sort of initial stuff at the same time. So I was like, okay, let's see where we go. And this will be a nice little sort of good start. Now, in terms of like sort of process, I think it's good to have some systems and ways that you kind of break this up. So again, mostly what I want to talk about today is the idea of simple process and how important it is to kind of figure this stuff out. I always like to kind of have a break, right? When you have that little thumbnail, exactly like what we saw in that Brom book, where you have your little idea. And I like that to be something that you can kind of do wherever you want. So here's me. I'll have to remember how to use Clip Studio, right? Let's reduce this opacity. Boom, make a new layer. And yeah, what I'm going to do is just sort of use that underneath and then sort of create the more finished illustration as we go. And I'm just going to do it with a fairly sketchy style and then add some pretty simple colors. So this one might go a little bit longer. So yeah, I'm just going to use simple pencil here. And now that I've sort of got it all roughed out, I can go in and actually do some of the drawing. And I think one of the things I'll kind of just play around with is basically just start by trying to rough in the character, because I think that'll probably be the most important thing. I've got this will be a pumpkin or something like that, and this will be a little sort of cat creature. Yeah, so we'll see. And I might even play around with sort of ditching the idea of this specifically being, yeah, I wonder whether I need a bigger canvas here. I'll see. This might, let's zoom out. Yeah, no, that should be okay. Yeah, I might even ditch this hat. I'm not quite sure yet. Right? So I'm basically going to start again. Right, this gives me like a pretty good indication of, okay, here's where all the things need to be. But yeah, I'm probably, let's maybe give her some goblin-y ears, just because that's something I always like to do. Boom. Right, rough in a nose here. Might be fun to try see if I could give her like a cute witch's nose. That might be something that's kind of fun to try, but yeah. So I'm just sort of roughing in what might be an expression, and I'll play around with it later. But yeah, I have a feeling that it might be cool to not go with the hat. I think that might be kind of cool. Let's see if we can think of something else. So yeah, it's okay to have some rough lines here, right? I feel like I've got the proportion mostly there. And I've got the opacity turned down a little bit. And yeah, I think maybe if I can make this cloak a little bit more ragged, that might be cool. So let's see if I can do that. And I've got another view here that we can use, which is where we can actually sort of see this in real time in Procreate. Sorry, not Procreate, in Clip Studio. Boom. So yeah, see if we can create some kind of scarf or something like that. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just going to rough in basically that sort of first anatomy pass. Right here I've got the rib cage. And what this is in terms of having like a process, right? What I always like to think of is that we sort of start with the most sort of expanded process. And that's normally where you want to start when you're beginning. And that is where you kind of would do your thumbnails, you do your little rough, and then you would go even further, right? Instead of doing this and just going sort of straight to this, you would then sort of do a real sort of construction phase and, you know, figure out maybe where all the skeleton bones are, all the kind of nitty gritty. But the thing with sort of processes is understanding kind of how to modify them based on how much time you have, how much effort you want to put in, how much detail and polish you want to get in the end, right? I think like all of these things have, a major kind of role to play. So I don't know what her hand there is going to be sort of holding if she doesn't have a hat. I'll have to think about that. Yeah, it's a good point. Oh. So when it comes to having your own sort of simple, reliable process that kind of works every time, it's just a matter of you kind of understanding the steps, understanding where you want to go. And so normally what I'll do is I'll always have my little sort of thumbnail, and I think that's a good place to start. We always kind of want an idea. And then the question is, how do I turn that into something more, right? How do I make that something more interesting? And normally there's a couple of different ways you can go. After that, if you're working in the line and color sort of style specifically, and this would be different if you're wanting to paint it, but the best thing to do is to either say, I'm just going to draw that, right? I'm just going to make a drawing, and you need to accept that to a certain degree. This would certainly be the case if you're doing it traditionally, but also if you're doing this digitally, that if you're just going to do a drawing, that drawing is going to be sort of messy, and that mess is going to become somewhat of a part of your sort of finished look, or you're going to have to figure out how to clean that mess up, right? So there's fundamentally with the process, there's this requirement, I think, to have a place where you can fully experiment and play, and that mess is okay. If we're always trying to avoid mess, right? If you're always trying to, with your process, your sort of step 1, step 2, if you're always trying to make sure that your drawing's clean, we're never going to have a really good ability to just let go, to be sketchy, to experiment. And so I think it's good to just kind of say, well, okay, like this is just a sketch, right? It's going to be messy, and the better you get, the cleaner it'll get. But you never want to sort of step away from that ability to have some mess in there, I think anyway. Because otherwise pursuing hard details, pursuing that sort of finish becomes something where we're very likely to tighten up. And especially in the beginning, I think this can be the case. So if you want tightness, if you want like more finish in the end, I think it's always a matter of understanding you're going to need more steps along the way, right? You're going to really need to dial up and figure out how to get that level of refinement. So I think often when you're talking about process, the first thing to think of is like, what am I actually doing, right? Like, what is the actual outcome? How finished does this need to be? Because that really sort of defines many of the other decisions you're going to make. I think from my experience and what I've seen kind of mentoring and teaching people this stuff for quite a while now is that the thing that kind of almost reliably doesn't seem to work that well is where you're maybe doing this, right? And you're just kind of sketching around, and then you kind of say, hey, this is going pretty well. Let me kind of take this and I'll just sort of turn this into a finished illustration. From my experience, that typically doesn't work very well. And if you're struggling with that, don't worry, right? Because that is not what I would describe as a reliable process, and it's certainly not sort of a simple way of going about things. That is very, very likely to go pear-shaped, because often there's things that you have to consider in terms of like the overall composition, the overall way that this is going to work. And you often find that in order to kind of really tighten everything up, you're going to need to maybe just repose everything a little bit, right? Just maybe nothing is going to 100% work as it sort of should. And that's fine, but yeah, you've really got to just say, okay, let's really figure out where all those lines go. Let's really figure out where all those anatomical lines go. And if you do that, then all of a sudden you'll be able to get that sort of working a lot better. Right. So yeah, let me know down in the comments below whether that sort of tracks, whether you've sort of tried to do that kind of in the past, whether you've had some sort of issues doing those sorts of things. But yeah, from my experience, that is certainly like a really sort of advanced technique, and it requires a lot of you understanding exactly how your process works. And yeah, that's certainly what I would describe as an advanced technique. Often what you need to do is say, okay, I'm going to need to really get in there and figure out what's happening to all of the eyelashes, all the fingernails, all the little bits and pieces. And in order to do that, yeah, I'm going to have to go in there and just double check and make sure things like the proportions, the initial anatomy are good. And then what you kind of find is that, okay, in order to do that, then if you're sort of going from spending like, an hour or a couple of hours on one of these sort of drawings to, okay, now it's going to be 10 hours or 20 hours, then what you find is like at some point you sort of start to realize there are problems with the composition, there are problems with the whole idea of it, and that essentially like the composition, the story, the narrative, the point of the whole thing is maybe just kind of not there, and it's really hard to come back from that. And then often what we do then is we try and change it and make it more interesting, or, we try and think of like, what would be a better story or a better thing to do here? And yeah, from my experience, that's when you start to run into troubles there. Boom. So yeah, again, also let me know whether that makes sense, right? So often the first step with a process is really thinking about like, what am I doing, right? Like how much detail do I need to be here? What's the point of this? What's going to be classified as success here? And that's another thing that I think is really easy to overlook, is that with any piece of art, you're essentially at some point going to have to say, it's done, right? Art is kind of abandoned, right? And you're going to abandon this piece. I'm going to abandon this piece at some point. And because this is a sketchy drawing, I kind of maybe don't need 100% to, get this to some crazy level of finish, but see if that, I'm not sure about this leg anatomy yet. Again, this is one of those things where like, it looks kind of solid until we take it to that next step. But yeah, if you're kind of thinking about this composition, you need to know like what is going to be success for me, right? Like when am I going to feel like, oh, this is done. This is actually the level of polish and finish that I wanted. This is going to make me sort of satisfied and happy. Or, are you going to say this needs a little bit more, right? So it becomes increasingly challenging to figure that out if you don't really kind of dial in exactly where you're going. So I think this, honestly, like this seems like it's like, that dude, that has nothing to do with process. But for me, that stuff actually is some of the most important when it comes to you really figuring out, what am I doing with this image? Where's it going? Right? Is to just think about, okay, like what is success going to mean here, right? Like when do I call this done? When can I feel like, yes, let's break out the champagne, let's celebrate. And I think otherwise it's really easy to sort of get to the end and be like, well, it can have more, right? It's like it could always have more. But the question is, have we actually built in enough to support more? I think I'll have to come back and fix those feet in a little bit. And I think her head is looking a little bit big. So again, there's two ways we could do that. One is we could just digital cheat things, right? Just go like this. The other is we could just erase it. And I often think that erasing it is a better solution in the beginning, right? And I think also, let's clear selection. Yeah, I think erasing it is probably the better strategy when you're learning, to be honest, because it tracks 100% with sketching traditionally. Boom. So I feel like, yeah, maybe that's a bit better. So yeah, see, this sounds a little bit metaphysical, but I think the first thing is to figure out, what am I actually doing? What's success going to look like? How long am I going to spend on this? Is this just a sketch? Is this an illustration? And that will kind of define a lot of things, right? It defines how much time you should spend planning. It defines how much time you should spend thinking about the overall tonal pattern, let's see if I can get, yeah, there we go. Seems to be working now. Yeah, the anatomy, right? It gives you a place to start, right? Because we often need a point to be like, okay, no, now it's time to go to the next phase, right? How much sort of detail do we need there? And that will define, I guess, how many steps you have in your process, right? And this is also another key thing. Like, am I going to spend time doing finished lines, right? So this is one of those concerns that I often have when I'm working like this, is that if I do like a full construction drawing that's completely separate to the sort of sketchy lines that I've got here, and then I do sort of finish lines over the top, that can often mean that, I'm not going to get this done in the kind of hour to hour and a half that I often kind of want for this type of little kind of art ritual video. And these are the concerns that I would often, spend quite a bit of time thinking about early on, because, I didn't have hours and hours to create art when I was kind of developing my folio all the time. And when I was developing skills, I needed to kind of figure out, like, okay, how do I iterate, right? How do I complete that creation loop? How do I get something out there? How do I learn whether or not my idea is any good? And often one of the best ways to do that is just to make art, right? We learn a lot through doing. But in order to do that, you sort of need to develop an ability to actually complete images. And often, I would find sometimes I would have an hour, sometimes I'd have a couple of hours, and I found there were these kind of time limits where, so yeah, I had these kind of times that certainly for me worked, and I knew what I'd be able to fit in a 1 hour time, a 3 hour time, and often it would necessitate kind of skipping steps or either adding steps. So the steps are often the thumbnail. We have a construction drawing where you really sort of figure out all of the structure, all of the messiness. You have a place to be messy, to be rough, and then you have a place where you're thinking about refinement. And often just kind of doing a drawing, which is sort of what I'm doing here, is it's kind of where we sort of combine a couple of those steps. So you're often combining the idea of your construction drawing with the kind of finish, right? And you're kind of saying, hey, I'm going to just sort of do both of them. And there's a lot of limitations to that, right? In terms of, that still looks like that's way too big. Yeah, in terms of the finish you're going to get, and that's just the kind of stuff you have to kind of figure out over time, right? But the reason that I think you are so much better off really developing a more sort of defined style, and you really kind of practice working within that kind of style and process, is because there's a reliability to having a very kind of simple way of making art, and a way that is reliable for you and that has the same steps every time, is that it solves a lot of those problems that I was sort of hinting at, which is like, where do I start? When do I know it's finished? What are the stages? And having a process that has like a very sort of defined endpoint means that you kind of do know when it's over. You do know what stage you're at. And often, again, if you match that to your sort of desired level of patience, which could be 50 hours for an illustration, it could be 30 minutes for an illustration, it could be whatever, right? That's part of figuring out who you are as an artist, which will kind of define, the types of jobs that, are actually kind of viable for you to get, right? And the sort of things that you actually want to do. But yeah, having a very solid system for creating your art, this certainly takes a while to kind of really develop, but it's one of these things that's kind of worth it. And a lot of it is understanding as you begin, like, how long is this going to take? What am I going to do? What are these steps going to be? So you kind of notice if I'm more in that 3 to 4 hour phase, that's when I'll do a construction drawing. But if I'm doing this, we ain't got time for that, right? That's just not going to happen. There's no way. Boom. Actually, I feel like, now that I remember, let's go eraser. I think I was actually going to make this come here. Yeah. Put a hand in there, thumb. And the other thing to think about when it comes to, like, okay, am I doing an illustration? Am I doing, a sketch? Like, what am I doing? Is that the more you think about making something as an illustration, the more you're going to really have to think about, what is my 1, 2, 3 read? Where am I really going to make people look? What are they actually going to be focusing on? Because that will in turn kind of tell you where to put the detail. This is another one of these things with illustration. You can't kind of put detail everywhere, but we can put it in some places. And the more you have an idea of what you're doing as an illustration and where that focus is going to be, the easier it is to make those calls. So I feel like, again, we got a couple of pretty simple kind of points of focus. There's a couple of issues here that I'm like, I feel like are pretty obvious now that I look at it, which is that, like, that skirt kind of felt okay, but now that I look at it, it's obvious that this is kind of going this way, that's going that way. And I think the whole thing needs to go this way a little bit more, or at least feel as if these are kind of swishing around a little bit more. Less directionality, basically. Boom. So yeah, all these things will kind of tell you, like, where do we put our focus? What is important? What's not important? Where's everyone going to look? It's only when you have that information that you can kind of really take things to the next level. Boom. Okay, and this as well, I feel like let's zoom out to do this. All right, just create a bit more of kind of fun set of lines here. That's just a problem where we're kind of zoomed in too much and can't really see what's going on the larger scale. All right. Again, see if I can add a bit of this to the hair. Now this is only the line so far. We haven't done any of the other kind of stuff. But knowing like how much time we have, how much effort I can put in, all of that gives me an idea now for like, okay, it's time to rush. Whereas if I wasn't quite sure on the timeline, it'd be very easy to, yeah, spend a lot of effort refining all these different things. There's a million bits and pieces that certainly could be drawn better, can always be drawn better. And process and knowing how long you're going to take with certain things gives you that feeling of like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't got time for this. Time to move on. Or no, I need to find time for that. This is just going to take longer. And I really find it's often these things that people are really getting tripped up over. It often feels like, I'm not quite sure what to draw, not quite sure what's going on here or there, but I really think a lot of the real kind of basics are often just a matter of understanding what is the intent you have as you go to create the work. Boom. Just creating some kind of sense of, yeah, something that's kind of a bit wickery, right? Maybe there's some kind of hair here or something. Again, see how we handle this with the color. But my goal is certainly not to create something super polished. But we will be trying to think a little bit about, some of that sort of composition. Maybe there's a bit of hair coming down here. Maybe it's hard to 100% know what's hair and what's not. All right, so we got our kind of broom thing here. And I got some weird little cat guy or something. I wasn't quite sure what this was, and I was like, I should probably just use some reference. But yeah, let's see if we can make something that feels a little bit more creaturey. Boom. be good to have this a bit more like really kind of cat like, right? He's really kind of grabbing this thing. Oh. Let's get rid of this. This is going to be behind here. All right, so what did I have? I kind of had this idea for some little sort of goblin cat thing. I don't know what this is. It's a terrible idea to try and design something without actually spending a lot of time on it. Let's play around. Again, can certainly look a little bit ugly and weird, right? That's kind of the... Right, there's a certain, like an intersection between ugly and cute. That's good to explore, but we'll see. I have no idea what the thing is. Oh, well. But probably better than another black cat. I mean, a black cat would be cool, but this feels a bit more fun. Like there's something going on there. All right, put a few of those little things here. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah, that'll do. See if we can add a bit of stuff. This feels like a very sort of boring, dull costume, right? Hard to know what we could do to make it feel sort of interesting. More stuff. I'm like, could I put some things up here? To make this feel a little bit more nuanced, less like one of those bad witch costumes or whatever you sort of get in the mail from a cheap costume shop. So one of the tricks to being able to, for me anyway, digitally kind of work up the drawing and, you know, start a little bit looser, refine it, is just lowering the opacity. So that as we do work up the drawing, I can, you know, continue to refine it, add a little bit more value, and it takes us a lot longer to kind of get straight to that kind of dark line, right? Bit more like we would with pencil. So I'm going to leave that hand pretty rough, I think. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that works, right? Let's rotate this a bit so I can do that. Let's do this at the same time. Boom. Boom. All right. Let's check it out on the full kind of actual feed from the iPad. This might be a better way to kind of look at it. You can actually kind of see what it sort of looks like front on. Yeah, zoom up here, see if we can add some of this, right? So we've got pumpkin. Right, and then just do a funny face. Right, put the rest on later. So again, all of these little things would be things that would require more structure if we were to have more of a detailed process, right? So for instance, making sure that, as we were carving out these kind of pumpkin features, that, they actually kind of did wrap around that, right, the anatomy of the pumpkin, being double clear about exactly where in perspective all the different sort of segments of the pumpkin were, right? And then that's what will kind of allow you to really render it more, to kind of add that extra level of detail, especially if you're going to paint it. Think about where it is in space, lighting wise. Yeah, all that stuff is really, really important. Whereas this, I think, will probably turn out all right if we add the color. But yeah. At the moment, it's a little bit lame in terms of form and structure and stuff. And also we're getting a few bad tangents. So let me, now that I've sort of got that there. So I think that's all right. Let's clear the selection. Let's erase a bunch of this stuff that kind of doesn't work. While we're at it, yeah, I'll speaking of like not it being a little bit lame, let's see if we can make it a little bit less lame. But this is one of those things where, as I was saying, there's no amount of me saving this, right, that's really going to make much of a difference, right? In order to really take the detail of this to the next level, I would need to properly construct it and then think about exactly how this kind of face shape sort of maps dimensionally to the pumpkin. And that's what the construction drawing is for, right? That's what that extra phase is for, that will give you that extra level of detail, the extra level of sort of polish in a reliable way. Without that, it's very, very easy here. And this is also why having some knowledge of process is really vital, is that, it's easy if you're not aware of this to just kind of spend ages here, right? And I think this is often what separates it. This is what actually experience is, right? It's a little bit less a matter of sort of drawing and skill. A lot of it is kind of saying, that there's not much point in me. Right, I think that's actually, I've changed the opacity there a little bit inadvertently. Let's pull that back down. Yeah, it's a little bit more a matter of saying, I know I can't sort of push this further, right? I know that it's not going to be possible for me to get like a really sort of high level of finish on this because I'm just kind of sketching around. I also know I don't have time, but but probably most important is me saying, but I'm not going to redraw it a million times because again, there's no real winning that battle, right? In order to win that battle, we would need to do a whole bunch of other things to really kind of get it to work a little bit better. Like if it hasn't magically worked out, right? Like the better your drawing skill gets, the more you're going to be able to dimensionally think as you create like, okay, yep, obviously the form is sort of wrapping this way. You would perceive the form. And then as you sort of put these lines in, you do that while you're perceiving the form. But a lot of that requires you do it many, many times. Anyway, I think we're probably done with that. Let's see if we can just plus this a little bit. But yeah, I think that's probably right. That's probably where I'm going to leave it. So what else needs to be done, right? Probably could, again, might be good to make this pumpkin a little bit more lopsided, right? It's looking very symmetrical, which again is one of those things that may not actually be a good idea. Boom. All right. Yeah. So basically the other elements I want some sort of foreground swoosh. I want a few clouds in the foreground. I want some clouds in the background. So let's make another layer over the top of this. All right. And I'm just going to create a nice fluid line there that feels kind of right to me. And another one. And these clouds are going to be in the foreground. Again, super simple, but I'll probably have to do. Now, is that going to help my cause? I'm not quite sure. All right, and now let's do another one behind. All right, boom. In this case. So again, these are super, super rough. I don't know whether that's going to maybe create some bad sort of tangents. So it might be better to think about something more like this. I don't know. Again, it's probably not going to feature much in the actual kind of finish. We'll see. Yeah, that'll probably do. All right, let's see. This is where it's good to do. Turn this off, right? Because I've had this sort of sketch line on here, and then be like, okay, what do I actually got? What do I got? Because often, if you are creating something based off that kind of first sketchy line, this is something that would get me all the time. Is I'd be like, yeah, I've got it. This is looking cool. I got all this sketchiness and looseness, and then I take away my sketch lines, and there'd be nothing there, right? Nothing to see here, folks. It's all gone, and you lose a lot of that sort of life. So it's always important to also have a part of your process, if you're doing this, where you focus on what have I got, right? Like, what's the drawing that I actually have? How can I plus it, right? How can I look in here and make sure, okay, do I need to delete this, right? Like, what's actually happening? Do I need to make some of these lines a little bit more refined? Let's go back to the over the top one, right? Right. So this is often a matter of just paying a little bit more attention to line quality, right? And what I often like to do is start to anchor some of these lines when I'm doing drawing. And by that I mean, just think about, like, where are the outlines? How can I, right, instead of sort of making one big line dark, right, just sort of think about where would be the shadows, right, that I can hook up and really push here and there to connect up these forms, right? So I'm sort of looking for places that probably would be a little bit darker. So instead of saying just make all of that darker, I'm just going to make some of it darker. All right, same thing here. Let's do a little bit. Let's put a few little accents of shadow. And this is a super effective, sort of simple way. Same thing here, right? We don't need to add texture everywhere. But if I just add a little bit here and there, it'll really help. And also, again, let's just find those silhouette lines, those actual lines where I've got something, where I actually need to push the silhouette, push the form, something that I know, right, I want to be a solid part of the finished drawing. Got a couple of these weird errant lines, right, that often can sort of appear. Boom, that looks like a line that was done in haste. All right, so again, what's happening with these lines? I don't know. It's not too important to me. Again, here, let's sort of push some of these shadows. All right, let's accentuate that. And let's go through and clean this up. So this is where, again, understanding where you might find a bit of sort of polish, right? By saying, okay, I have these lines that were sort of drawn there behind. How can I clean those up? Same thing here, right? Let's just clean up any of that nonsense. Right, boom. Yeah. And again, we'll do a final sort of look at this later on, but for the most part, yeah, I'm just going to have to let a lot of these things go. Now, I'm like, was that part of some final thing there? Or can we get rid of that? Yeah, I think that's good. So it's a lot, if you are sort of working over a sketch, yeah, there is a point where I always say, like, we need to do this. And that is get rid of that original sketch and just look at the drawing you do have. And there is a specific point at which it's really important to do that, or you're going to end up with, yeah, some mess. So the other thing we're sort of doing here is, you know, I want to make sure that I'm thinking about that 1, 2, 3 read, right? So if we sort of zoom out a bit, like, where is there either too much fussiness, too much detail, too much polish? And I think I see a lot of that kind of happening sort of over here, right? It's feeling very, very busy, but there's nothing really there. So yeah, let's see if we can refine a couple of these edges. I feel like this is going to be a place where if we look at the silhouette of this creature, silhouette of the broom, all right, if I kind of go through, really punch a few of these lines, all right, differentiate this, boom, Right, I think all of a sudden this might feel a little bit more polished. So yeah, let me know if these ideas are sort of helping or making sense. Again, this is not like a specific tutorial or anything. Just kind of talking about, you know, some of these ideas of process, right? Like how I think it can be really important, and you know where people normally sort of get tripped up. Yeah, I find it's really easy to add those kind of errant lines with this. Probably need to turn on palm rejection or something. But yeah, I feel like that's gonna do it. Probably need to put a bit of emphasis around here. Boom, boom. Right, really sort of clean that up. But yeah, I think I can solve a lot of those other bits and pieces in the final coloring phase. So again, a big part of your process is also having stages along the way where you know this is where you check for the finish line, right? Like this is where you check for the story. This is where you check for the idea, the intent, like what the whole purpose of the whole thing is. And the reason that that's important is you kind of have to understand, once you go past certain points, there really is no point, pun not intended, in trying to save certain things or, you know, achieve certain things. Like once you sort of get to this stage, it's very hard to like fix the story if the story's no good. That ship has kind of sailed, right? You know, there's not going to be much luck kind of doing any of that. It's kind of done. And I think just sort of understanding that, like, okay, what's the best way for me to actually get some form of closure on this, or what are the actual tools I have now? So again, for me, like, it's not composition. It's basically just, here's the line work, right? Here's me sort of finessing these different things, right? Like that's what's actually gonna do it. But yeah, I think that's kind of pretty much done. So again, we'll jump over here, see if we can kind of look at it on the actual sort of screen with the feed. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's kind of working all right. Yeah, next stage in the process is adding some flat colors. If this was just a sketch, that's probably where we'd leave it. But yeah, I think this could certainly do with some really kind of simple color. But I'm kind of running out of time, right? I don't want to spend hours and hours on this. So let's look at some really sort of simple techniques that I could use here. So again, if we look at how to fill this, what I'm going to start to do is just look at picking some really sort of basic colors here. Right, let's look at some color sliders. Let's see if I can pick a kind of dark blue, because I feel like that's going to work for the sky. Oh. All right, let's just hide these. All right, boom. Let's fill that. And see if we can just do some really basic. All right, let's just get a sort of simple pen or something. Do some clouds. So again, it would be cool to flat this properly, but I don't think we're going to have time. Cool. All right. And let's turn on this one now. And I'll also turn on this and see if I can this is probably not the best flatting brush to use in any way, shape, or form, but it should get the basic job done. Boom. Cool. All right. So now the main one that I really want is this. Let's get a... See if I can pick one of these and I'll make it really big. Oh, that's not going to work. Yeah, that'll do. All right, so let's see if we can kind of pick a color, kind of like the background, but I'm actually going to sort of start it and make it a bit darker. We'll see how this goes. Boom. And I think for most of these kind of shapes, we are going to have something that's a little bit darker than the background, right? I think the hair will be like that. Probably the skin, I think, might be a little bit sort of darker. So I'll play with that. I'll do that separately. All right. Boom. So yeah, super rough. We can just think of this as like cracking out some markers, right, and having a go. All right. And that often is like where I think we can also get lost with digital techniques and stuff, is that, you know, it's really easy to get, well, what color should this guy be? I think maybe kind of also red might be cool. Yeah, it's really easy to sort of be a bit paralyzed by, oh, what sort of technique do I use? You know, how do I do this? Like what do I do with the layers? If we just kind of keep it simple, often those things disappear, right? Or become far less of an issue. Boom, 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 boom. All right, let's see whether it's going to do that thing again. Yeah, still need to get better at using Clip Studio. Boom. Yeah. Yes, I'm actually like using it and playing around with this because I'm trying to incorporate a lot of these sort of techniques into the Line and Color Academy course, and also run some, you know, do some specific training in this. So I'm just experimenting, right? And that is often, you know, how you will kind of learn these programs, right? This is often how I do it because I've got such a specific way that I like to, you know, learn how these things work. All right, so what else do we need to do? Let's pick a color that is really going to sort of work for this kind of skin tone. And again, I'm not exactly sure what it will be yet, but that's okay because there we go. I think something like that. Again, let's not go too high contrast. With the whole thing. Just keep it nice, flat, simple. All right, boom. But yeah, often in the beginning, what I always start out with is just like, let's just keep this really simple, right? Let's just think about from a process standpoint with coloring. You know, the less we can kind of play around with layers, the less we can kind of mess around. Often like the easier it is to just kind of get started and think about not necessarily the process of like how I do this with layers, but the process in terms of what is the sequence that I will add these flat colors. So there's probably a sequence of me kind of thinking about, okay, I'll put the dark colors in first, then I'll put these colors in, then I'll do this, right? That is really going to be optimal for me developing a process that, you know, kind of works. And if I just kind of think about that, right, just one layer, like what order do I flat things in? I think that often just focuses us, right? And also, the more you have to pay attention to your edges, the more you start to think about your edges, the more you start to build your hand-eye coordination, right? There's a certain degree, I think, where obsessing over the artistic sort of technical style that digital has, where, you know, we can sort of isolate layers and just use layers, is you kind of lose a bit of that repetition that you get when you are working traditionally, right? When you're doing traditionally, you are constantly having to stay away from the edges, right? And move quickly, but also effectively. And I think doing that is actually a really good way to build your hand-eye coordination. And the other thing is, it's easy to zoom up a lot when you're working digitally and, you know, spend a lot of time on, will this line work? You know, is this thing super important? You know, what's happening here? What's happening there? And you kind of forget that basically, like, none of that stuff really matters that much. If you're kind of looking at an image and it's kind of zoomed out, right? You know, half the time it's going to look fine. You know, whether you're 1 pixel out or 1 pixel in or whatever, right? Often that's not going to make or break it, right? And the other thing is, if you work sort of progressively like this, thinking about, okay, what's that base color? Then let's add a second color. It's a lot easier to, you know, figure out and be like, oh, okay, let's just stop, right? You know, like that kind of works. This is kind of right. Yeah, really easy to kind of go overboard. All right, let's pick this, and I'm going to figure out, let's pick just saturation up a bit. All right, see if I can add just a bit of extra luminance here and there. That might just add a bit to the character. And the other thing we can do here is, often if you just do a little bit of this, right, like a real little bit will go a long way, right, in terms of just saying, let's put a little bit of extra warmth here and there, right? Just adds a little bit of something. Don't know how that got there. All right, opacity up. What else have we got? So I think the other thing I'm going to do is kind of say, okay, let's pick this color again. Let's go more yellowy. And let's think about making a lot of these sort of adornments that she's got gold, right? Let's see if just being super basic there will help us get it done. So this is also where you could do this on a separate layer. And that might work. And what I might also do is be like, yeah, let's select that color. Then let's make it a little bit darker. So I've sort of got like a dark version of it. Because often that, again, just adding a little bit of feeling of sort of shadow, or it's going to really plus the fact that this is gold. And also I think I can use a lot of these same kind of feelings. Let's see if I can go a little bit more orange. I can use a lot of these with this. And I feel like maybe that little cat guy will be a kind of similar idea. So let's have a look in the actual sort of app view. You can see again the colors probably look a lot different. Yeah, so again, my goal now here is like, okay, let's kind of rough it in, right? I'm like, yeah, you know, that kind of works. That's kind of fun. It doesn't look very Halloween-y, which is why I said, like, look vaguely Halloween-y. But yeah, let's sort of pick this and see whether I can use like a slight kind of different version of this for this little cat guy. So you can see again, I'm not doing what you should do on layers, right? I'm not going fancy at all. This is all one layer. But often there's wisdom to that. And I think that's why, having these iPads, right? Having these cool applications where you can, like Clip Studio on iPad in simple mode is really, really good because you can, I think the real power of it is you can kind of mess around like this. And then if I wanted to take it a little bit further, I can take it into the full desktop app, or, if you don't have the desktop app, you can kind of just play around in the non-simple mode, right? That you've got all the power you could possibly want. Yeah, something like that. All right, now let's add this. So I'm just using very similar colors here, right? And this is not at all by accident, right? I think it's really good to just work with a simple base and almost think about it again, like, like you just have markers or something, right? And you're just, all right, boom. Oh, let's make that full. Yeah, like, I'm just using the same marker, right? Same color, right? It'll give it like a bit of a consistency that, is kind of fun. I think that'll work. Oh, let's see if we can get that. I'm going to use this for the claws. Let's make it darker, make it warmer, make it a little bit more red. Boom, boom. Oh, actually, I should. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this because I kind of made him the same sort of color as I would make the straw here. So again, we're going to have a few little bits of blue, right? Kind of like stuck between. But that's all right. See, yeah, this is not going to add much contrast to him, but maybe that's all right. All right, now I lost that color, which is annoying. Boom, boom. That's not working at all. I need it darker, right? Again, probably even darker than that would be good. That's all right. Let's pick that. So same base, lower saturation. Let's make this just for the eyes in here. Boom. Right. I'm like, yeah, it'd be better if it was kind of black, right? But again, this is very vaguely Halloween. Kind of, yeah, fun, cute Halloween. It's interesting because, yeah, we don't really have Halloween in Australia in the same way that people in the US have Halloween, because it's hot over here. So it's a lot of where you do get it, which is kind of quite rare, but where you do, it's a lot of very sweaty children in awkward costumes, right? That are not designed to be worn when it's really hot. So you can see here again, what I'm doing is sort of just plussing and working this kind of silhouette, but I'm kind of just making it up, right? And again, it's on the same, I probably could or probably should say, let's kind of have that behind this character, but, none of that matters, right? It's just fun. Again, because in my mind, I have the intent that once this is done, it's not something I'm going to probably work on much more. So, it doesn't matter whether all the lines and layers and all that kind of stuff is, 100% sorted. That's fine. Yeah, all right. Gold. All right, let's put some more gold here and there. So you can see if we kind of zoom up, right? Like it's not very clean, but I think it'll work all right. And likewise, again, probably could create something that was, right, like a little bit different here. Maybe make this kind of top thing feel a little bit different. Right. this blue here. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. And I think the more you get into the habit of kind of just having fun and, again, understanding the intent with your process, how long you're going to spend, that's when it becomes a little bit more fun. Because, like with this, for instance, I know this is not going to be something that lives forever. As I said, it's just something that's fun. It's just something where we, we're experimenting, we're completing the artistic ritual, right? And yeah, I really think that's often where, you find a lot of enjoyment with just making art again. When you kind of know, this is my outcome, like this is what I'm doing, this is when it's finished. Let's see if we can find a little bit of a boom, saturation. Let's see if we can put a little bit more under here. Again, still being pretty loose with this kind of line work. I could put the opacity down if I wanted. Right, again, we could push in here. Let's see if I can plus this a little bit. And yeah, it's just like how much time you got, right? That all looks super rough. But, it's a little bit better than it was. Right. Put a little bit of that shadow here. Right. Boom, boom. Boom. And yeah, you could keep going, right? We could really kind of start to add some tonality to some of these bits and pieces. That could be something that, takes it to the next level if you kind of wanted. I'm just going to see if I can add a little bit more because we're pretty much out of time here, right? So just putting this everywhere. Right, that's the glow, and then we just go back down, go up to yellow, go back down to white, make it lighter. Boom. Gives us that glowiness. And then the last one is, yeah, we just keep going down in saturation till we kind of make it feel even brighter and whiter. Boom, there we go. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's see if we can, where is some of that? I'll probably just have to do it again. It's the skin. Oh. See if I can do these kind of lips. And let's see if I can add, if we just do a tiny bit of kind of feeling of like maybe there is a tooth there or something. Again, I'm not sure whether this is just me playing around, but often, right, it's just like those last little bits that'll make a difference. I think that's going to be too much though, right? Right, doesn't really fit with what we've got going. Yeah. So, you kind of see there, if we go back to above, that's kind of what it's looking like. And the next step would be, which I don't know how much time we got to play around with that kind of thing. But yeah, the next step would be we just get a big spray, right? Soft, or you'd go gradient. And right, then we can kind of say, yeah, let's sort of fade those out a bit. Boom, let's do another one, right? Let's fade that out a bit. Let's do another one, right? Sort of fade it out a bit. Just sort of homogenizes everything a little bit, makes it look a little bit sort of cool. And then we would do like, okay, let's add one of those. Let's make it kind of, where's my overlay? Boom. And this is where, again, you could play with different kind of colors or whatever. Right, homogenize all the colors a little bit more. Right, this will just kind of squish it all down and make it a little bit more. And then you probably, play around with adding some more color effects and maybe sort of pull out some of the colors, add some adjustment. But yeah, for me, I'm like, that's working pretty well. Let's go here and see if I can add a signature, right? Because I think we are done. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, that's my vaguely Halloween-inspired illustration. Let's check it on the screen here so you can kind of see it, right? Let's move that over a tiny bit so you can kind of see that. Boom. Yeah, so anyway, thanks for hanging out. Hopefully this has given you a couple of ideas about process. I kind of shared some of this for you. We didn't spend too long on it, especially on the color. But yeah, I think we did a little sort of fun illustration, and I think that's what it's all about. Complete that illustration, the sort of creation loop, right? You go, I've had an idea, right? We go through a process, we sort of finish it, and then, the next time I'm like, maybe this brush, maybe this thing. But mostly with process, what you want to do is say, I should have spent more time on the idea, on the thumbnail. I should have designed this character more. I should have come up with a better costume for the witch. You have an idea, you figure out where in your process that fits, and then you go again. And, the next day, do a little session, see if you can get it working a little bit better, get to that next level. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. See you on the next one. Happy drawing.